And I'll be handing over to Rebekah shortly. We'll come back about 5 minutes before the end, and sort of draw an end to our talk with Rebekah, and that'll be an opportunity to share some announcements. So if you have anything you would like to share with the community, anything about a job, a job that you might know that is open, or if you're looking for a job yourself, if you have an event that you're running, or anything else that you think might be relevant to a bunch of content strategists and designers, you'll have an opportunity to share that at the end. But I'm really happy to introduce Rebekah Barry, for our session today. And we're really excited to have Rebekah. Rebekah is a content designer and a content strategist, and she's the author of a new book called Considerate Content, which, as we were just saying before we started, it's a really a much needed book. It's kind of surprising that a book like this doesn't already exist, but Rebekah saw the need for it and she decided to write it. It's a book around accessibility and inclusion in content, specifically in content. So we know there are a lot of resources out there around accessibility and things like the WCAG guidelines and accessibility from a general sort of design point of view. And we know as content people how important accessibility is to our work. And we certainly talk a lot about accessibility, but until now, and correct me if I'm wrong, there hasn't really been a whole book devoted to accessible and inclusive content, specifically, and especially one that includes a lot of really useful advice around how people with different kind of states of being and different medical conditions experience content, and how that might affect the way we create content to be accessible and inclusive. So Rebekah is a content designer and strategist. She studied English and law, and she combines her passions for social justice and inclusion in her consultancy work. She's worked with large public sector organisations, charities, and not-for-profits to improve their user experience. And you can buy the book through Content Design London, our friends at Content Design London. They have for those of you who are in Australia or who are outside the UK, they have a print-on-demand shop. So if you order the book in Australia, it will get delivered very quickly. It will get printed on Australia and delivered very quickly and with very reasonable postage costs. So encourage everyone there's also an ebook version which you get as part of the bundle as well. So encourage everybody to go out and buy the book. I'm sure you'll want to after hearing Rebekah talk. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Rebekah.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I'll start sharing my screen. But yeah, it's lovely to be with you all. As a middle-aged Brit, I'm sure you can all probably guess what Melbourne means to me, which is Erinsborough.
Nothing wrong with that.
Us Brits are very boring about neighbours, right? Okay, let me do some screen sharing. All good? Yeah, so I'm going to have a chat with you about my book. It's called Considerate Content, and the next line of it is how to make your content more inclusive and accessible with a focus on neurodivergence and health conditions. So as Angus was saying, we're having a quick chat before, and when I started writing this book about 4 years ago, I couldn't believe that there wasn't this book already. And it kind of the process took so long. I definitely couldn't believe that there aren't more books on this by the time it was published. So yeah, it does constantly surprise me how little is written about content. So yeah, please do write stuff. So the premise of this book really, and sort of go back in time a little bit, how it came about was because I had a lot of blog posts, like ancient blog posts and half-written blog posts. And when I kind of went through them, I realized that they were all on a really similar theme. And I thought, I could probably put all these together and I'd probably have half a book. Um, but the kind of big question really is, how do we create better content for people with different needs? And I suppose the obvious thing is we all have different needs. And I think sometimes the sort of the narratives around accessibility and inclusion can sometimes, I don't know if it's just me, but feel a bit like serious and dry. And but really this is just all of us, or all need different things. And that's it really. So in the book, we there are it's sort of three parts. So the first part is about context and definitions, and talking about things like the social model of disability and sort of what I mean by inclusion and all that kind of stuff. And the second part of the book is practical advice on how to make your content more accessible and inclusive, which is more sort of handbooky kind of thing, you know, like how to do structure well, how to write a good heading, all that kind of stuff. And the third part of the book is about specific conditions, because when I was writing the book, what I really didn't want to produce was like a set of guidelines that were really dull and not, you know, that didn't have a human truth to them. Um, so when I was writing the book, I spoke to a lot of people um, who had experiencing different conditions, and just talk to them about their lives and how they experience apps, like what websites they use, all of those kind of things. Um, and there were some conditions that, well, I found super interesting from a content perspective. So I focused on some different conditions in the book, and for each condition, we talk about what it is, and then how we can help from a content point of view people who are experiencing that. And also that I use like one sort of case study story kind of thing in the book. So each condition has a story from a specific person. And how I've decided to format that in the book is that I'm literally just using people's own words. So it is just somebody talking about themselves, which the reason that I find that really powerful is because it's great if we can do user research and we can be in the room talking to people with loads of different experiences. But the reality for lots of content folk is that that isn't actually possible. You know, if you're the only content person, for example, you know, you haven't got any budget for research, all that kind of thing. I really just wanted people to be able to benefit from that. From the human stories behind all of these things that we talk about. So in the book, what the conditions that I focus on in part 3 are neurodiversity, and go deeper into autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. And I think one that was sort of more unexpected for people is there is a section on how mental health might change how you experience content. Um, so I talk about bipolar disorders and depression. Obviously, like depression is probably the most common condition in the world. um, and then two more things. So one is aphasia, which I'm going to talk to you about in a bit more detail, and deaf blindness. So that's what we cover in the book. We haven't got time to cover all that today. But first of all, I wanted to talk to you about what I have called symptom soup. And when I was talking to people, nobody had one thing. So I think it's really easy to say, oh, if you're writing for people just with dyslexia, you should do X, Y, Z, and that kind of thing. But the reality is that most people don't have one thing. This is especially true for neurodivergence. There are so many crossovers. Like the more I've kind of researched about it and spoken to people, the more it feels like we're kind of quite near the beginning of understanding neurodiversity, but I'm kind of expecting that before very long, we won't be saying someone is ADHD or autistic or whatever, because people experience so many symptoms across so many different things. And there are also many, many mental health bits as well that run through people's experience. So when people were talking to me about their ex, they would quite often say, well, that might be my autism, but it could be this or it could be that. So what I've called symptom soup is kind of just to think about taking people as a person, a whole person, not a person who is one thing, like a person who is blind or a person who can't use their right hand. Like they'll probably have a whole bunch of things as well that isn't just about that one thing. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is three different things. So I thought I'd take one part of neurodiversity. So I'm going to talk about ADHD, and we're also going to talk about aphasia because I find that super interesting from a design point of view, and also deaf blindness because I think they all sort of cover slightly different aspects of what we as content people can bring to make life a little bit easier. And also, like some of this is very slide based and organized, but as an ADHD myself, I may go off piste. I'm a fundamentally unserious person, so so we'll see how we get through. So I'm going to start talking about ADHD first. So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which most people agree is a terrible name. There is definitely no deficit in attention for ADHD. So there are three subtypes, which are inattentive, hyperactive or impulsive, or combined. And lots of people are combined, which means that you can have aspects of any of these things. As we're kind of thinking about in the symptom soup area, people don't neatly fit into boxes. So when people get a diagnosis, they'll probably be told that they are one or more of these things, but people's symptoms are of many different types and shapes. So depending on how much you know about ADHD, it is one strand of neurodivergence. The people who are diagnosed as being inattentive is one set of symptoms that have been grouped. But it's quite often that attention is drawn to places that are interesting rather than places it should be. And I think we as content people are often want people to be doing something. And depending on what you're producing content for, particularly if it's in the public sector, you might be producing content about something that is fundamentally boring to people. It's the bottom line. If it might be something very important, but also something people don't actually really want to do. For example, doing a tax return or renewing their driving license. Like, not, it's people can be interacting with content for many different reasons. And something that ADHDers do a lot is their attention is drawn to what they find interesting, not what they should be doing. Then the hyperactive and impulsive subgroup, that's more like the sort of stereotype, I think, that people have of ADHD, which is generally young boys bouncing off walls. I think that's the stereotype. But a lot of hyperactivity is actually inside people's heads, as well as the other ways that people think of, which are more obvious, like needing to fidget or needing to move around. But lots of hyperactivity is actually in people's heads. So what can we do to help from a content point of view? So the first thing is that we can give an outline and make sure that the important information is first, so that if somebody does lose attention, they've got the important thing. I mean, this is something that journalists always do. It's a very old concept that sort of gets forgotten sometimes, I think. So this is this is a quote from one of the people that I spoke to, which is about I read the beginning and then I trick myself into thinking that they know it and read it all and make a conclusion. So they talk about getting bored and twitchy. And they form an opinion or conclusion and then they skip to the end like they've passed go. So I think this is quite a common experience for ADHD, is that they'll start and then they'll drift. They'll think that they know it already. So as well as making sure that you're front loading important stuff, we use clear, concise sentences and paragraphs, which we all should do anyway. So this is another quote here. I get antsy when there's too much information or it meanders and it doesn't get to the point. And then using plain language. So this is an interesting one. So this person says, I translate things into my own colloquial language and interpret it, which has led to problems. So in this case, he's talking about how he interpreted something into his own words, told his accountant the thing he was talking about, and it turns out those words were wrong and he got into trouble. So this is one of those areas where if someone is kind of translating it into what they think it means, but that's, that's probably because of the words that are being used. So we need to make sure that we're using the real, the simplest words we can to describe that thing so that it's reflecting exactly what people need to remember and repeat. This is a super important one, which is giving clear steps and instructions. So this is a quote from somebody saying, I need things to be spaced out. I can follow instructions all day long. My brain is oddly logical as well as chaotic. So you don't need to read this, but I've just done a kind of comparison of a piece of content, which was a real piece of content that I took off an intranet somewhere I was working. But describing a process as a paragraph is actually just really difficult to understand. And by breaking things down into steps, and it might be like smaller steps than you think that I don't know, like surely somebody can follow this. Is this not too many steps? But the easier it is for people to follow if it's just literally bite-sized pieces. You do this and then you do this and then you do this and then you do this, and that is the end. So breaking down into process steps is just much easier for people because you can see at a glance that there are 4 things you've got to do. Whereas if you're reading a paragraph, you can start reading the paragraph and think, oh yeah, I get it, and move on. So lots of ADHDers need reminders. So I've spoken to people who have alarms going off on their phone all day to remind them to do all kinds of bits and pieces to make sure that they get things done, especially boring things, because they'll be doing something more interesting instead. So when you're particularly in services, it's really important to give people reminders to let them know where they are in a service, where they are in that user journey, and if there are offline processes. So government services are a classic in this one. Sometimes you'll need to post something off, for example, or there'll be emails coming in, but services may not just be able to go click, 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 click. and you're at the end of this service, you may be going in and out online and offline in different processes, going to see somebody, for example. So making sure that people receive reminders and know where they are in that journey is really important, because they might start something and then forget that they started it. I think this sums it up quite well. I'm best dealing with the problem in front of me and work better dealing with things in the moment. So this person was saying that they can do the thing that they intended to do, but if there is a stop in the journey and they are expected to pick that up in a week's time, that's not going to happen. So they'll want to receive something to tell them to do that next part. Avoid all unnecessary distraction. So attention can be easily pulled away by more interesting things, usually, like a Slack notification or, or these kind of things. So this person is talking about how they get distracted by notifications going off and it immediately pulls their attention away. And obviously, you can't control what's going on people's screens, but you can control what you put onto people's screens. And we just need to make sure that we're not putting additional things in other places. You don't need like a video of something where you want the person to read something over here. Like, try to give people one thing that they need to be focused on at that point. So a summary of that is that we give an outline and put the important information first. We use clear, concise sentences and paragraphs. We use plain language. We give clear steps and instructions. We put reminders and placements within services, and we avoid all unnecessary distraction. So I'm not going to go into that much detail for the next two because we'd be here all day. But the ADHD section kind of gave you a sort of good reflection of how I cover it in the book, I think. With aphasia and deafblindness, we'll go into less detail because, as I say, I could talk about it all day, but we haven't got all day. So I'm going to let you in on something that so at the moment I'm working on a project that's about AI. So I thought it would be interesting to see what AI came up with for these things, just to see how like weird and stereotypical it would be. And this is the picture it came up with for aphasia. As you could, like, the words aren't words. But I just thought I would let you know that was an experiment for my own interest, not because I think this is a good picture. Don't judge me. So aphasia is really common, and it's a really common thing that not many people have heard about, which is a funny one. So aphasia is a language impairment that affects communication. It's caused by damage to the left side of the brain, and the left side of the brain controls communication and language. The damage to the brain in most cases is because of a stroke. So it's something that many stroke survivors live with, is aphasia, but it can also be caused by, any other thing that can damage your brain, an accident, an injury, a tumor. But the most common one is a stroke. Because it is about damaging that left part of the brain, it affects people in vastly different ways, like a huge spectrum of different ways. And because communication is not one thing, it is many things, the variation that people will experience with aphasia is huge. So global aphasia is the most severe kind of aphasia, and that means that you have problems with speech, with writing, with reading. So there's all the different ways you can communicate and your brain is dealing with. It could be any of those things for somebody, and any combination of those things. So someone might be okay with reading, but absolutely not be able to write. So it's what happens is it's really difficult to describe, and actually it's really difficult to understand unless you are them. Um, but people know what they want to say inside themselves. They could think it, but something goes wrong in the processing of it. So somebody can know, like, they know exactly what they want to say, but it won't come out of their mouth properly in the way that they want it to, or they won't be able to type it in the way they want it to, or they won't be able to read and things could be jumbled. And it's about the brain processing of it. So it isn't about any kind of intellectual impairment. People are exactly the people they always were. Um, uh, but it can come across that way, because that's what people find very difficult, is because the words are here, but they're not coming. If they can't come out of your mouth in the way that you want them to, people take from that I don't know, people often take from that there is like an intellectual impairment rather than a communication impairment. Because this is caused by brain damage, it's completely possible that someone's brain may have been damaged in other areas. So they may have impairments in different things, physical impairments or other parts of the brain that are affecting different things. But the aphasia part is about just communication. So what can we do to help people who have aphasia? So again, we think about clear and simple language. So when I spoke to people with aphasia, people usually describe their own particular quirks, and like most of the people I spoke to had particular words that they kind of lost. They always said, oh, I always struggle with like this word, and they couldn't say this word because it had gone in the conversation. And so they'll like maybe think of workarounds of when the word I'm thinking of that won't come out, I'll use this one instead. So people know themselves about these things and have to try and sort of translate themselves almost in order to get themselves to get that across. But it can sometimes be simple words that people would lose, but the more complex the language, the more likely that it's going to be a problem. So clear and simple language is really, really important. What a lot of people talked about was only having one point in a sentence, because depending on the type of aphasia you have, not the type, but the way they affect you, it can be quite difficult to kind of go through an entire sentence and to process a point. And if there are multiple points in a sentence, that can really lose people. And I think this is the case for everybody, but that people particularly actually pointed this out, that they'd noticed it themselves. Because what I found is when you're talking to people about communication and it's something that's changed over their lifetime and it suddenly happened to them, they really do become experts in this themselves. So it wasn't just that I had observed that 1 point per sentence was better. People were actually saying to me, please just write 1 point per sentence. So it's just fascinating how much people become experts in these things themselves when they're trying to navigate it. This is a really important one for people with aphasia, and it's about letting people choose how they receive information, because it may be that they struggle with reading. It might be that they struggle with hearing information, not with the physical hearing of it, but the processing of things that they are hearing. It might be that they struggle to write things in, so filling in a form might be difficult for them. But it could be any number of these things in any combination. So what came across really strongly is that people really need to have options about how they choose to receive information. And depending on the severity of aphasia, people might need pictures or diagrams rather than words, for example. Um, but it's really about options. So people can use screen readers, for example, maybe. Like I spoke to lots of people who were using screen readers because the reading of it was difficult for them. But then for some people, that kind of mechanical type voice of the screen reader, they found very difficult to understand for other reasons. So everybody's needs are slightly different. And the more options you give them about how they can interact with that information, the more likely you are that there will be one that works for them. So yeah, pictures and videos are really important to some people. Simple diagrams rather than words. And this was a really interesting one that people talked about, was about hearing content in a human voice. So screen readers usually are not, as a human voice. So they're obviously things like audiobooks are in a human voice, and that can be a huge preference for people. And one expert I spoke to, she was really emphatic that she really, like, to be honest, I've never seen this, but she was said, why, in important information, especially in public sector information, why can't somebody just press a button and have that page read out to them, like by a real human who created the content? So this is another one of those things that, like, probably wouldn't come to mind, because you think, oh, worst case scenario is, oh, I've ticked the accessibility box because it's a screen reader is able to read this. But it might be that a screen reader might not be the right thing for those people. Screen readers can actually be quite difficult to use. So they're not suitable for everybody. So I'm going to talk about deafblindness. This is again, not again. I think you will make a judgment about what this means. But most people haven't probably thought about it too deeply, maybe. um, so this is another AI picture that's seeing what my experiment in seeing what deafblindness means to AI. But deafblindness is probably what it says on the tin. It combines a combination of hearing and vision loss. It's rare that a person will have complete hearing loss and complete vision loss. Most people who are deafblind do have some of both or either. So the sort of, I don't know, if someone was going to picture somebody who was 100% blind and 100% deaf, then that would, obviously, I think to most people, you think that would be the hardest thing in the world, which it would be super hard. But most people are not in that position. Most people have some level of vision and some level of hearing. And deafblindness increases with age, because obviously all of our vision and hearing deteriorates as we age. So most deafblindness is caused by aging. So deafblindness can also cause mobility challenges, because if you've lost aspects of two senses, it can cause mobility difficulties as well, but also some of the conditions that may cause deafblindness may also cause some physical things as well. The most important thing, I think, to remember when thinking about deafblindness is that most people have some level of vision and some level of hearing. So assistive technology is extremely important to this group. So some sight and hearing aids that people might be using are screen magnifiers, screen readers, braille displays, text to speech, and hearing aids and implants. So what can we do? What can we do to help? I think the number one thing is we need to make sure that those aids that people are using work well with the content that we're providing to it. So a lot of this is about the nuts and bolts accessibility that I think most people think of as accessibility. We need to make sure we're structuring things well. We need to make sure that headings are descriptive. All of those technical aspects need to be in place so that those aids that people are using work as best they can, because this group of people are hugely reliant on assistive technology. And like, it's wildly different now compared to not even very long ago with how much phones can do, and like earbuds and all of these different things. There are so many things that can help people. So our job is to make sure that we're feeding those things content that works well for them. So things like structure. So just saying links and buttons, we must make sure that they're descriptive. We must make sure that they are all technically correct, so that when somebody is going through those with a screen reader, for example, they know exactly what's going on that page without seeing it. We need to make sure that all pictures have alternate text, and screen readers don't do things like describe images. So we need to make sure that all those things are described well. So I think the biggest thing for deafblindness is making sure that we are allowing their assistive technology to do the best job that it can. And again, as with aphasia, it's formats. So because we're thinking about a loss of two senses, people are going to need different things as individuals. So videos must have captions. We need to make sure that a podcast has a transcript. It's all about making sure that there are alternative formats to every type of format has an alternative format. So people are going to want to do different things. They might want to read words over a video. They might want to hear a video and read words. They might want to just hear the words, not read them. There are so many combinations that are going to work better for people as individuals. So I think the best thing that we can do is allow them to be able to choose those combinations. I think a lot of content design is very reliant on the written word, and that isn't always the best thing for people. People need other things as well. And the last point is, does this all seem a bit familiar? Yes, because it's all just good content design practice. So I think we can look at different conditions as lenses almost in what works well for people, but this all boils down to good content design. There is, no huge different thing. It's all because, like, the DNA of content design allows people to be able to experience content well. And there are tips and techniques of things that you can do to help people and open your mind, think about different formats, all of those things. But it really all boils down to good content design. And that's it from me. If you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was wonderful, and yeah, great introduction to the book. I should probably also say we've had a few people in the chat talk about their own experiences with ADHD and aphasia. So, as well as questions, if anyone would actually like to share something from their own experience, there you'd be, thanks for what people have already shared in the chat. But please feel free to put your hand up if you'd like to say something about that, or to ask a question out loud. Otherwise, just use the chat. So Rebecca, we had some great comments from people who are ADHDers and or ADHDers, and also Lee who has experienced aphasia. said how great it was to see aphasia actually mentioned in your book at all, because I think Lee said in about 15 years of working in education and learning design, they'd never seen it mentioned in a single book, blog post, or course. So a lot of appreciation there for the fact that you talk about it in your book at all, and also the sort of practical guidance and support that you're giving in your book. Someone also mentioned the fact that aphasia can be more milder and temporary as part of a condition like hypothyroidism, and as a side effect of some medications. That was from Kerry Ann. So I think, like a lot of these, that we talk a lot about temporary impairments that we experience, that make accessible content kind of, relevant to us. So this is an example of that kind of thing. So
What I
yeah,
did,
a lot of great comments there. Sorry, Rebecca. Yeah, go.
no, I was just thinking what I didn't mention, but that I actually think is one of the most interesting things about aphasia and design is
Mm,
that, um, we've got more and more search based as time has gone
mm,
on. Like literally, I know it's not anymore because it's stuff with stuff, but I think the idea of Google just being like one box and that's the entire design. Um, like people want to simplify things down and down into a simple search. But for lots of people with aphasia, a search does not work because they cannot find the right word to put in that
mm.
sentence.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it makes information architecture, which I think people have
Mm.
forgotten about in recent years. It brings back the importance of information architecture and people being able to find
Mm.
information they need in different ways, not just relying on that one search box.
Such a good
Um,
point, and that's such a good piece of Um, such a good argument for those of us who are making exactly that kind of that kind of case, that people should be thinking about their menus, not just giving, not just assuming that a search box or a chat bot, that's the other thing. Oh, well, people will just type into a chat bot, but what if people can't think of the words to type into the chat bot?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Lee had a question, Rebecca. What's your view on the idea that instead of writing alt text, we should include the image's key information in the main body text, making the image decorative or supplementary rather than needing its own description? Um,
Yeah, I quite often do this myself actually. Just I think it really depends on the individual image, but I do completely see the point. I do find something slightly othering about alt text.
mm,
Uh, I don't know. So uh yeah, I don't have a yes or no for it, but I
mm,
definitely
yeah,
get where you're coming from.
yeah, yeah,
And I
and
do think it'd be nice if things were just in body
yeah,
text sometimes.
yeah. And Dot's asking for specific recommendations on how you enter good at alt text. So Dot, I would recommend you get hold of Rebecca's book, because there's some great advice on actually how to write a good piece of alt text in the book. Um, I'll just go back to getting questions coming in, which is great. I'll just go back to an earlier comment because I don't want to lose it. There was a comment from Chris, about the fact that sometimes people have, or sometimes there are different things that we need to be doing, or different conditions might lead us to do different things, and sometimes the opposite things. And sometimes they can even be two conditions that are being experienced by the same person at the same time, but they have kind of almost like opposite advice. So the example that was given was, having high contrast for people with low vision versus not so high contrast for people with dyslexia. Do you have any thoughts about that, about how you kind of balance? So, when it does seem like there are competing needs, how we actually balance
Well,
that?
I think lots of competing needs uh, are actually things that are nothing to do with us as the people who create the content.
Mm,
So thinking about things like contrast, I think it's our job to make sure that that can be changed. But I think people control their own usually. So the people I spoke to um, had filters on their own. They had their own stuff, like
Mm.
one needed purple, for example, um, to make the words not jump around for her. So I think people tend to control those things themselves when they have a very specific need, but we need to make sure that it can work for them. Like
Mm.
what we're creating allows for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So yeah, so sometimes people can sometimes change things so that, like classic example, you can make text bigger or smaller. But if your website doesn't actually work with magnified text or yeah, smaller text, then um, you're not allowing people to use those things that are available to them. Thanks. So a good question from here from Alana. How do you manage a requirement for an accessible page to also support advertising CTAs, which are by their nature distracting? So how do you have these kinds of conversations with people who want to um, who want to plaster ads on their website?
Well, I mean, it's doing its job, isn't it? I mean, I think it just has to be accepted that you're going to lose people from whatever it is that your point is if things are there. Like,
Mm,
that is literally the point of advertising, is to pull your attention towards it. So it is doing its job. I don't know.
mm,
But yeah, I think it's probably just about being truthful with yourself as an organization, that if you put this thing on, it is going to distract from what you actually
yeah,
want them to be doing.
yeah.
Um, it's not just an easy money in. Right?
Mm,
Like you are
mm,
going to
yeah.
lose the point of what you were doing.
Yeah, and I guess how is if we're doing things that are making our content inaccessible to some proportion of our audience, that's also going to have an effect on our bottom line as well. So yeah. Um, there are resources. I know there's a resource that I can't remember the name of it, but um, it was done by Deloitte in Australia that was kind of estimating the economic benefit of businesses investing in accessibility. And I kind of think, and I'm sure all of us here think that we should be making our content inclusive and accessible and considerate for its own sake and for the sake of people. But sometimes you do need to have. Sometimes it helps to have the economic, um, yeah, a bit of economic ammunition as well, for people who need to hear that business case being made. Um, so another comment from Chris, which I think is sort of related to what you were saying about sometimes people will have their own sort of workarounds that they use, and we just need to sort of enable them. So Chris says, I work for an e-commerce website for an electric wholesale company, and peers always say yes, but these people work and know what to look for. They work with their hands and their eyes, etc. Um, we don't need to look into this. So where you have people you work with who might be kind of just downplaying the need to think about accessibility. Any sort of tips for how you start that conversation?
I think it's probably down to the fact that so many think accessibility equals screen readers equals blind people, when that's
Mhm.
just like one tiny aspect. Um, so as an example, I recently did a project with the Arts Council in the UK, a huge disparity in the arts from the normal population, if you like, of people who are neurodivergent, for example.
Mhm.
So it might be that just because you say that people are working with their hands or whatever, I don't know, it might
Yeah,
be there are actually a whole bunch of people who don't like working in an office and they like working outside because that suits their brain type. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think assuming that accessibility is only important for people with a very specific sort of view of what a physical disability might be, for example, really excludes all the ways that you need to make your content accessible for different
Mm.
brain types
Yeah.
as well as physical stuff.
Yeah. Fantastic. So we're running out of time, Rebecca. We do have a few more questions. I'm just going to pick one. Apologies to those who've also asked questions. If you don't mind, Rebecca, we might, if you've got time, we can stay on for a couple of minutes after our announcements. But the one thing I want to ask, that a number of people are interested in, what was the biggest insight you had from actually writing the book, even though you had a great understanding of the issues before you started? So yeah, as part of the actual writing process, what was the biggest insight, the biggest surprise, the biggest thing you
Um,
learned?
I think for me, it was all about aphasia because I honestly didn't know
Mm,
anything about it before I started talking to people. And I spoke to uh, academics, like doctors who this was their area. But the whole aphasia community was so welcoming to me because nobody talks about this and nobody writes about it. So all
mm,
of these academics who were doing studies felt like they were doing studies in this stuff, but it wasn't becoming visual to the population, basically. So my biggest insights were all around aphasia. I find it absolutely fascinating and just really surprising that we don't talk more about this because it's so relevant for content in
mm,
particular.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. And we've had that, yeah, reaction here today as well from people who've experienced aphasia. So yeah, so thanks so much for the talk, Rebecca. We'll stay around. If you've got time, we'll stay around for a couple of minutes afterwards. But I just want to do a few quick announcements. So just let me share my screen again. Right, this will only take a minute. Yeah, sorry, I've just lost my. Okay, so if anybody has an announcement I would like to
Angus,
share.
we're not seeing the slides, we're
Oh,
seeing your whole screen.
all right, that's bad. Let me try again. Desktop 2. You seeing the right thing now?
Got it.
Yeah, fantastic. So if you would, yeah, anything you'd like to share yourself, please feel free to pop it in the chat or put your hand up. Just a few announcements from us. Our next meetup, we had such a wonderful meetup in December last year in person in Melbourne that we're going to do it again sorry, that should say 31st of July, not 31st of June. So that'll be next month. Apologies for those of you who aren't in Melbourne. We'll be thinking of you. It's 5 weeks away, so time to plan a trip to Melbourne if you can possibly manage to do it. And it'll be the same venue as last time, Mr. Wilkinson in Brunswick East, where we had a really great time last time. But we will be back online in August, and we have a couple of our wonderful New Zealanders giving talks in August August and September, I should say. We've got Ruth Henry giving a talk on content design at scale and pace, which I know is something that a lot of us are very interested in. And then Lana Gibson doing a talk on analytics. Again, something I think we feel like we should know more about than a lot of us actually do as content designers. So they're going to both be going to be fantastic talks. But we hope to see some of you in July in Melbourne. Our talks are up on YouTube. So if this is your first time, go and have a look at some of our wonderful past talks, and like and subscribe. As many of you know, we do training for Content Design London in Australia or in the Australian time zone, publishers of Rebecca's book. So we have a couple of courses coming up, the Content Design Fundamentals course in August and Content Design in Action in July. Still places available in both of those. So check out the details on our website, and good opportunity if you happen to have training budget that you need to use up by the end of the financial year in Australia. So that's our announcements. Just have a look.
There
Just
was an
quickly check the
announcement.
chat. What was their announcement there?
Petronella is looking for a junior SEO position. So that's in
Mhm.
the chat. Well, she's based in Melbourne, but these days job could be anywhere, I'm assuming. So if you're looking for someone, Petra has popped that in the chat, her details, LinkedIn and her email.
Fantastic.
For that. Thanks.
And yeah, just lots of thanks to Rebekah for the great talk. So if you do need to drop off, please do. Rebekah, I might just ask a couple more questions if you don't mind sticking around for a couple more minutes. The Mason asked a question about age-based increases in some of the conditions you've described. So yeah, is that kind of a factor that you're aware of, that some of what you've talked about in the book becomes more and more relevant as people get older?
Yeah.
Yeah, short answer. Yeah.
Yeah, more common as you get older. So
Yeah.
FA more common the older you get, even, and then obviously hearing and sight loss, we all deteriorate with those factors. We all deteriorate.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. And then Dot asked a bunch of questions that are somewhat technical. So I don't know, Rebekah. Yeah, this might be putting you on the spot a bit. Questions like, can users easily adjust sensory elements like brightness, sound, or animation intensity? Are there built-in options for toggling between high stimulation and low stimulation modes? So yeah, I think questions that are around kind of how can we actually build content platforms that are more that enable this kind of users to sort of select options that are that work better for them. So I don't without going into too many specifics, do you sort of have any thoughts about that, Rebekah? Have you seen any change in the sort of the options that are available to users to kind of control these things, or any sort of software that's doing a particularly good job of allowing users to?
Well, I think that new software literally comes out pretty much every day. It changes so quickly and is so, just comes on leaps and bounds every time. Like, I think what we need to do is make sure that our content is simple enough and well structured enough that for any of that software can do its thing. I think we need to be providing like the really solid foundation to make sure that any software that somebody chooses can do its job over it. I mean, it's the same with AI, isn't it? Like, AI is just regurgitating rubbish when rubbish is there.
Yeah, that's right. And more, but also more and more we need to be writing our content with the knowledge that it is going to be regurgitated by AI, and people are probably going to be more likely in the future to be reading a piece of content we've written completely out of context as part of an AI answer to a question, rather than kind of obediently going to the beautiful website that we've created to sort of house our content. So yeah, we have to be writing content that's simple and flexible enough to to work in all these new and strange contexts. Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Rebekah. Sorry.
Interrupt again. There is another couple of announcements in the chat of people who are keen to hook up with people looking for work. So we've got Alana's looking for short-term assignments in content strategy or change comms, and Kerry-Ann Gilroy, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your surname, Kerry-Ann, freelancer specialising in IA and content strategy, looking for new clients and projects. So again, both those announcements are in the chat. So sorry, Angus, just wanted to grab you before you wound up.
No, all good. Thanks so much, Lauren, and thank you very much again, Rebekah. So yeah, a lot of appreciation for the talk and the book. We hope we're sure it's going to do really well, because it's even both. I'm sure we're all going to read it ourselves, but what I also think is great about it is it's a book that we can tell other people to read, like tell our clients to read, tell people we're having robust discussions with about the need for accessibility and inclusion, because it's written in such a compelling and compelling way. All those personal stories are fantastic, and it's just a fantastic. It's a resource that should have existed for many years, and now it does. So thank you so much for writing it, and thanks for being with us today. Great. Oh, no worries, Dot. Oh, good. So we will see some of you in Melbourne next month, and hopefully see everyone in a couple of months back online. So wonderful to see you all.
Thanks, Bye.
Thanks, Agnes. Thanks, everyone. See ya.